In way of review, let's go over this quiz over what we talked about last week. According to chapter 11, 1 Corinthians, who's the head of every man?
Christ.
Christ is. Who's the head of woman?
Man. Husband.
Okay, yeah, and so since it's the same word, we usually translate this wife because husband is mentioned right there, but it is talking about women in general, wives and their relationships with husband in particular. Question number 3, what does it mean when a man prayed with his head covered in that day? It's dishonoring his head, which it would be dishonoring Christ. Okay, if a woman's head is uncovered, it's like she had what?
No hair?
Yeah, just like she had no hair or shaved her head, which was a disgrace. So he's saying, why would you want to do something disgraceful like that? What did God give women as a covering?
Hair.
Their hair, right. Question number 6, what did Paul say about those who are inclined to be contentious on this issue? He's giving them, the principle he's giving them here is somebody has to take a leadership role. When somebody takes a leadership role, that means somebody has to submit. He says this is the way it is. It has to be that way in the church, and it has to be that way in the family too. And he says if people want to get upset about this, what is his answer to them?
We have no other practice.
We have no other practice. And he mentions in all the churches. So one of the points he's making is, I'm not picking on you guys at Corinth. I'm not just saying you have to do it there. This is just the way it is. In fact, although the implementation of this, how you demonstrate that I'm being submissive, may be different from culture to culture, and you may demonstrate that in different ways. The principle is true. In fact, he gives not just here, but over in 1 Timothy chapter 2, he says the principle goes back to creation. Goes back to creation. So this way, it's not just a cultural thing, it's the way God established it. Now, the way we display that, such as the covering of head and things like that, may vary from time to time, but the principle, that does not change. Question number 7, what made some of the gatherings not for the better, but for the worse? The divisions. The divisions. Actually tearing them apart instead of bringing them together. That's exactly right. Question number 8, why were they eating together? He says, you come for what purpose? You come together with these meals for what purpose? To have the Lord's Supper. That's exactly right. And he's saying, you're coming to have the Lord's Supper, and guess what? You're not having the Lord's Supper. So you're not really doing the thing you're coming together to do. Right? Okay, question number 9, who was being humiliated at their meals?
People that had nothing.
The people who had nothing. The people who had nothing. They're putting a spotlight on the fact they didn't have nothing, and they're actually causing further class distinction there because of that. Who did Paul ask them to imitate? Him. I just think that's huge. Can you turn to somebody else and say, hey, this being a Christian thing, just watch me. No, just watch my dad. But that's one of those things that I think is a challenge for us to do. Okay, the bonus question here, if Jesus is equal with God, and by the way, does the Bible teach that Jesus is equal with God? Yes. Philippians chapter 2, he did not regard equality with God something to be held onto, but he emptied himself, taking on the very form of a man. It's right out of Philippians chapter 2, so he's equal with God. If Jesus is equal with God, then how can, verse 3 here, say that God is the head of Christ?
The sense of authority, Mark, because as Christ honored God,
Thank you.
we honor Christ.
Yes.
As the women honor us.
And when Jesus said, I came to do the will of the Father, he took on a submissive role. So God was the head in the fact that Jesus was submissive to him. I think this is such a great illustration because it has nothing to do with superiority, inferiority. Sometimes we get those things mixed up, and that's where it sounds so offensive. Well, this has nothing to do with that. Just look at Christ's relationship with God. But somebody has to take the submissive following role, and Jesus willingly did that, even though he was equal with God. In the same respect, the Bible, many times, even here, makes the point, hey, we're equal in our standing before God. But you know what? Somebody has to take the lead. That's personally why I like the illustration of elders, because in the congregation, somebody has to take the lead. We're not saying they're have a closer relationship with God. We're not saying they're superior in their spirituality. We do look for qualifications, things like that, like the Bible says. But nonetheless, somebody has to take the lead, and it's our job to submit to that lead, right? Okay. Chapter 11, any questions, comments on those?
Mark,
Does
just
that make sense? Yes.
real quick, no, I just wanted to ask, we were talking about question 2, the head of the woman. It occurred to me, I guess you could say if the woman isn't married yet, then I guess her father would assume that role, head over woman. That might be a reason why it's not translated.
Yes, very definitely. Both Colossians and Ephesians talk about the family relationship, and it's parents over children, but the man has to take the lead in the marriage relationship. That's right. Okay, chapter 11, we're ready to start with verse 23. That's where we left off last week. But if you'll indulge me, I'll try not to take too much time here. I want to start reading back at verse 17. Because verse 17, it will remind us the context that he's talking about. Because he's not starting a new subject in verse 23. The context starts back up in verse 17. So let's quickly read, we already talked about this. So let's quickly read verses 17 through 22, and then we'll start making comments in verse 23. Verse 17, he says, "But in the following instructions I do not commend you." So he's taken on a new subject here, and he's saying, let's talk about this. And he's talking about when they get together for these meals where they have the Lord's Supper, right? He says, "In the following instructions I do not commend you, because you come together, it's not for the better, but for the worse." So things are going on here, and it's actually the exact opposite of what should be taking place. It's not making it better, it's making it worse. For in the first place, when you come together as a church, I hear there are divisions among you. This is what's making it worse. And in part, I believe it. There may be some details there. He's just saying the overall message, it makes sense from what I hear about you guys. "For there must be factions among you in order that those of you who are genuine may be recognized. But when you come together, it is not for the Lord's Supper that you eat. It is not the Lord's Supper that you eat, even though that's the purpose they're coming together for. For in eating," verse 21, each one goes ahead with his own meal. One goes hungry, another gets drunk. What? Do you not have houses to eat and drink in? Or you despise the church?" Which, by the way, in the early centuries, they didn't have a building that they went to. He's talking about the people they're meeting with. Usually, especially in New Testament time, they meet in homes. Later on, they'd meet in like the catacombs and different places. But anyway, he says when you come together, he's talking about the other people. He says, "Don't you have houses to eat and drink in? Instead of meeting together with the rest of God's people, do you despise the church of God and humiliate those who have nothing? What shall I say to you? Shall I commend you in this? No, I will not." He says, "The way your services are going now, this is no good. For I received from the Lord what I also delivered to you." You notice he's still talking about the same subject. Still talking about them getting together for the meals here, where they're supposed to be remembering the Lord. He says, "For what I received from the Lord, I also delivered to you that the Lord Jesus, on the night that he was betrayed, took bread." Now, this passage, I hope, is really, really familiar, because we often read this around communion time, when we take the Lord's Supper. But I want us to go through and make sure we understand what's being said instead of just reading this. He says, "When I received this from the Lord," remember, as an apostle, Paul had the same training. He was trained by the Lord just like the other apostles. He talks about this in Galatians, the first chapter. He received this and he's passing it on, and he calls it the night that Jesus was betrayed. This, forgive me, but this has always gotten to me. Of all the things he could call that night, the last night with his disciples, the last night of his earthly ministry. There's so many different ways he could signify or name that night, but he calls it the night that he was betrayed. And the reason I want to belabor this point just a minute is when we think of betrayal, who do we, the average person in the church, who's the first person who comes to mind when you think of betraying Jesus?
Judas.
You think of Judas,
That
right?
wasn't it.
What does the word betray mean, by the way?
Turn against.
Okay, it doesn't technically mean Benedict may be an illustration of that. But what does the word mean? Have we talked about this before?
Sell someone out.
Sell someone out. It's sometimes translated, and this is really interesting to me, because the exact same words in the original language, sometimes they translate them betrayed, sometimes it's translated handed over. But it's the same words in the original language. Now, why in the world wouldn't you translate it the same way? Well, I understand this. Sometimes in going from one language to another, depending on the context, you're careful about the words that you use. But it's really interesting to me because did Judas betray Jesus? Of course he did. He did betray Jesus. But he wasn't the only one who betrayed him that night.
That's true.
Who else handed Jesus over to be crucified? It wasn't just dude. Yeah, Pilate betrayed Jesus. Even before you get to Pilate, who else handed Jesus over?
Crowds.
Okay, the Sanhedrin did. The Jews did. Why did they hand him over to the Romans?
Because they couldn't do anything. They couldn't kill him.
They couldn't kill him. They couldn't carry out capital punishment. That's right. Well, for this reason anyway. And so they handed him over. Do you realize that's the same word for betrayed? You could have translated that. In fact, when he says the night Jesus was betrayed, he was betrayed by Judas, he was betrayed by the Jews, he was betrayed by the Sanhedrin, he was betrayed by Pilate. Romans chapter 8 was around verse 31. Romans chapter 8, verse 31, it says, "If God be for us, who can be against us? He who did not spare his own son, but..." What is that word?
Betrayed him. Wow.
It's talking about God. Same word. God betrayed Jesus. The night Jesus was betrayed. I just think it's unfortunate that our minds immediately go to Judas. He's betrayed by everybody. In fact, one of the points we were trying to make yesterday, talking together, was none of this could have happened unless Jesus unless Jesus handed himself over.
Part of the plan.
Yeah, the more I think about the way this word's used and all the different people involved, this is a perfect word to describe that night.
Night he was handed over.
Yeah, everybody betrayed Jesus. Jesus betrayed himself. God betrayed him. Had to hand him over, or this wouldn't have happened. So I think it's the most fitting way to talk about this. He says, I'm going to pass this on. The night that Jesus was handed over, on that very night, to commemorate what was going on, so we'd never forget the significance of this, he's going to take the Passover meal that they're sharing and he's going to give new meaning to it. So he took the bread when he had given thanks. He's going to mention this twice, which is really interesting. It's significant, I should say. When Jesus ate, he prayed and he thanked God. I think it's more than just a ritual. I think it's a really good habit. The Bible tells us we should receive things with thanksgiving. But here Jesus made this practice. He had given thanks. So he took the bread. When he had given thanks, he broke it and said, and by the way, I hope you don't mind. If you got comments, please interrupt me and just say this. But little things like this, that's why it's so significant to me. And maybe this is part of the way I've been taught or raised or whatever. But I do not like when somebody breaks the bread ahead of time, or they have I had a professor who called them celestial pellets. Have you ever been in a church that has these little things for communion? They look like celestial chiclets. That's what he called them. You know what a chiclet is. Does anybody know what that? Oh, forget it. But one of the reasons, and again, maybe this just goes back to the way I was taught, but one of the reasons I've always disliked that is because what we're trying to remember here is that night, and part of the significance of this is the bread was broken. So I've always liked to help remember that, to have a big enough piece of bread, communion time, where you actually break it. And there's significance in that. He says, he takes the bread, after he'd given thanks, he broke it and he said, "This is my, this, which gender is the word this in?"
Nude.
It's in the neuter. So if he were talking about it's really my body, it would have to have been in the masculine. So he's talking about something that represents his body.
This is a picture.
This is a picture. This represents my body, which is for you. Do this, giving them the bread, breaking and giving to them. Do this in remembrance of me. This idea of remembering in Scripture, time and time again, the words used for memorial and remembering are not limited the way most of the time we use the word. When we use the word to remember something, it's kind of like, I want to remember it so I can write it down on the test. I just want it to come to mind. And in the Bible, it had a lot more significance than coming to mind, because the purpose of remembering was not just to bring it to mind, but was to bring it to mind to make a difference right now. So it was one of these things, I'm not just thinking about it, I'm thinking about it so that it will have an impact. So when he says you do this in remembrance of me, it's supposed to have a constant impact on us as we do the remembrance. Excuse me?
Sort of get the idea, I don't know what the Greek is, but it's like a memorial, that it's more than just bringing to mind.
It is.
It's a memorial.
It is. And I apologize again, because you guys have heard me talk more about on other occasions, but that's why I am just, as an American, I'm so disgusted. You know, I'm trying to hold my emotions in here. But we have gotten to the place as a culture, we can't even ask people to pray. We just ask people to, and we can't say anything about, you know, think this or think that. No, we just have a moment of silence. What in the world is a moment of silence for? So you can count to 10 inside yourself. Let's just have a moment of silence so you can sing that song you were singing. It's so void of any meaning at all. It takes away from memorializing, or it takes away from any significance. I just get sick at the thought of things like that. But anyway, we take the bread, which represents his body, as a remembrance, so that we can think about it, that it might make a difference right now. Now, this is where, going through this little by little, got to remember the context here. What is Paul so upset about?
They're taking it all for granted.
Taking what for granted?
They're making a meal or something.
The significance.
And how are they making a mockery of the Lord's Supper? By doing what?
They're just
Excluding.
eating and not sharing amongst
Excluding.
themselves.
It's the church, which is a, what's he going to refer to the church as in chapter 12? He's going to spend the whole 12th chapter calling us the body. It's the body of Christ. He says, you know what? You guys are tearing the body apart more than you're building it up. So he's so concerned about this. He's saying, listen, Jesus set this aside so that we'll remember. And what's the purpose of remembering? That it might make we think about him so that it might make a difference right now. Which, by the way, if we think about Jesus and our relationship with Jesus, what difference should that make in my relationship with you?
A lot.
And why should it? Because the only reason I have a standing with God, it's all grace, isn't it? I mean, it has nothing to do with, so how in the world can I be arrogant or class conscious about anybody else when the only way I have a standing with God has nothing to do with me? You understand what I'm saying? If I've died to myself, then how in the world can I get back in those shoes when I look at anybody else? So this remembering should make a huge difference when we're with other people who are part of the body, part of the family of God, because of what Jesus did. So he says, do this in remembrance, let it make a difference now. In the same way, he took the cup, and I know this, I can't, some of you grammarians will know this word, but there's a word where what he really means is the juice in the cup. You know what I mean? What is that word?
Synecdoche.
Thank you.
What is it? Synecdoche.
Yes. It means, when you talk about he took the cup, you're talking about the liquid in the cup is what you're really talking about. But the reason I think he chose to use synecdoche, or however you say that, is this phrase, the cup, is used many times throughout the Bible. And when it's used in the Old Testament, how is it usually used? When you talk about the cup of God, it's usually the cup of what?
Wrath.
Yeah, it's the cup of wrath. Well, if that's coming to mind, what's the significance of it? Well, I know he's talking about the cup at the Passover feast. And he's going to say, this is something, I want you to think about something new here. I want you to think about my blood. But it is also tied to the wrath of God, because Jesus shed his blood as a result of taking the wrath of God, right? So the many ways he could have referred to that juice, the way in which he chose to refer to it brings to mind what's really going on when Jesus died, right? So he says, in the same way he took the cup after supper, saying, this cup, again in the neuter, this cup is the new covenant in my blood. Okay, another word for covenant is what? Contract or agreement or I keep going until I hear the one I want.
Will.
Testament or will? Will. And according to Hebrews chapter 9, when does this covenant, this testament, this will, when does any will go into effect?
After you
Yeah.
die.
When somebody dies. When somebody dies. When does this one go into effect?
After you die.
When Jesus died. So when he says this is a new covenant in my blood, we have a new contract with God that went into effect when Jesus died. And it makes all the difference for those of us who are covered by the blood. Do this as often as you drink it, and we're going to talk about the frequency of this in just a little bit. As often as you drink it, again, in remembrance of me. Let it make a difference right now. For as often as you eat this bread and drink the cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes. Yeah, before I go off on this, but what do you think of when you think of that? Why do you think he said that? Why do you think he said, hey, I want you to remember, I want this to have an impact on you. And when you get together as Christians, as the body, you're supposed to do this, to think about Jesus' body, Jesus' blood, and how it made a new relationship with God. I mean, the bigger picture here is it's all God's grace, right? That's the only reason we have a relationship with God. So that ought to have an automatic impact on my relationship with everybody else. But then he adds this, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes. How do we proclaim the Lord's death? In what way? What does that mean?
Well, we emulate, we echo that, we have our own death by immersion. And
Oh,
we're
that's
reborn.
exactly right.
We're reborn, but it's huge, Mark, because the blood is what washes sin. And so we need to remember that, the sacrifice. that he
Okay,
made.
okay. I am with you 100%, except you just changed to remember from proclaim.
Okay.
In what way is this a proclamation? I
No,
agree
no,
with
no,
you.
you're right, the
I really agree with you. But in what way is this a
Well,
proclamation?
we've been reborn.
We have. I agree.
Okay. Yeah.
The way that you do it.
Well, now you got me thinking it's a proclamation of a new birth. And our, and this may not be where you were headed, but
Could be.
we're proclaiming his death, but his death brings life. So
Eternal life.
Yeah, we are. I'm just doing a poor job asking the question. What you guys say is exactly right. What I'm trying to get at, though, is this idea, and I don't disagree with anything you've said, but what I'm trying to get at is this idea to proclaim something, it has to be known. A proclamation, something that's declared, something that's proclaimed, is something that other people find out about. So part of what we're doing here, if other people don't know this, if they don't know this about, if it's not evident the way I live my life, if this is not a statement I'm making that other people, then I've not been proclaiming, have I? Steve?
I had a professor that was visiting Jerusalem,
Ooh.
okay, on the Lord's Day. They had forgot to bring the fruit of the vine and the cracker. So they had to go into the stores and buy that.
Yeah.
All the Jews knew what these Christians were doing.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
they were proclaiming being Christians, proclaiming Jesus as Christ, because they were getting fruit of the vine and the bread to take the Lord's Supper.
Yes.
So in doing that, they were saying, we
Yes.
believe in Jesus as the Christ, the
Yes.
Messiah, not just...
I love that. I love that.
Mark, I suppose I can get away with this, were they jacking up the prices?
become those Christians area.
Okay. Okay, let me rant and rave just a little bit. If I understand the bigger context here, that's why I wanted to go back and start in verse 17 again, is he is using what we refer to as communion, the Lord's Supper. He's using this. It was part of their bigger service, but he's using this as a classic example of how they ought to relate to one another when they get together as a church. He says, because if you don't have unity, if there is division, that's totally opposite of everything that the Lord's Supper is about. We have a standing with God, and the only way we have that standing with God is through Jesus, the exact same way anybody else has a standing with God. It's not because somebody earned it or worked harder than we. No, we all get there by God's grace. So it all puts us on equal footing, so to speak. Well, if I understand this right, and this is in this big point here, Lord's Supper is part of a bigger point about unity within the church. If that's, I really do think that is the case, then part of the proclaiming is making it a real point, to making it a priority in my life, to be part of this fellowship, especially when I take the Lord's Supper. That's why, don't shoot me, but I think it makes very little sense, and I don't want to offend anybody, but I think it makes very little sense for anybody to have communion by themselves. And in fact, I have gotten to the point where if somebody requests communion because they can't be a part, I don't say, no, I'm not going to do it. We regularly take communion to people. But you know what? I never promote that. I never try to push that, because that runs contrary to a key element of what this is all about. Because communion is not just me and God, it's us and God. And that's part of the, in fact, that's why I just think it's so important. If somebody, I know there are times, big trip or whatever, you're on the road, if somebody wants to, sometimes Christian families will pull off the side of the road and have communion service because it's Sunday or whatever. And I'm thinking, well, again, I don't want to be judgmental here or anything, but you know what? Why don't you go find a church?
Yeah.
Why don't you find some Christian people and have communion with them on the Lord's Day? Because the whole idea is us. It's the body of Christ. It's not just taking a piece of cracker and some grape juice and remembering about Jesus. That is important, and it does remind us. But it's part of a bigger picture here.
And I've been to a few churches and done communion. When I had one, Father Terry, whenever, he always went last at communion time, and you would see him clean up the little crumbs and stuff, and he would put them all on his palm, and then, he'd see one on the ground, he'd pick that, and he always went last. And I asked him one time, I said, why do you do that? His answer to me, there will be no divisions.
Oh.
And that was his answer, and he would just clean that up, and it was, because it was crumbs from everybody else that took communion in his church. And I never understood that, you just mentioned, but that was his answer to me.
I like that part.
There'd be no division.
Yeah.
But if he saw all the crumbs at the table and stuff, he would clean them up in his palm. I always thought that was kind of strange when he did
Yeah.
that. But
Well, there are.
now it makes a little more sense.
There's also this, and Jed uses this fancy word all the time, and I can never remember what it is. It's called
I know it was
intinction
myself.
or something like that. Is that the word? Whatever. It's where you take, like, the sop, you take the bread and you dip it, and you give it to somebody. In some churches, and I know it has what do I want to say? It has an Old Testament flavor to it. So it's kind of like, oh, that's kind of neat. But you know what? Even though that took place during the Passover meal, they would dip this. That's not the same thing here, taking the bread and breaking it. So that bothers me when we make little changes to our communion service. I don't mind doing that during a special, whatever. That's not what we're talking about here. And a lot of times there's symbolism tied to a lot of these things, but there's significance to it too. So was there another hand over here? I didn't want to miss anybody. But here I broke and I stopped, and I should have gotten the rest of this all together. But it says, we proclaim the Lord's death until he comes. Verse 27, whoever therefore eats the bread or drinks the cup of the Lord in an unworthy manner will be guilty concerning the body and the blood of the Lord. Wow. This first of all, the word unworthy. Does your translation say an unworthy manner? I sure hope so.
Yes.
Okay. If you look this up, there's no word for manner, but the word unworthy is an adverb. So if you translate it strictly, it's unworthily. And so to say an unworthy manner, that's very good. The only point I'm trying to get across here is he's not saying you have to be worthy. That is so important to get, because nobody's worthy.
That's right, your attitude, isn't it?
It's unworthily, the way in which you do this. Now, to understand that, look at the bigger picture again. When he says this, which verse is this? This verse 27? Yeah. What would you say? I mean, don't think about yourself here. Just think about verse 17 and following. What do you think is one of the classic examples right in these verses of doing this in an unworthy manner?
Just going up,
Maybe
up
getting
blind.
drunk. Maybe that would be one.
Or just eating a
Eating and
bunch
not
of bread.
sharing with the other.
Forgetting about other people who are there.
Yep.
Yeah, anything that, and I know we're supposed to be focusing on remembrance of what Jesus did as far as our new relationship with God, but remember the significance of remembering is What difference does it make right
The
now?
word be empty. I mean, if you're doing it with an empty manner, if you don't have any thought process, any, you know, when
Vainly.
you're doing vain, if you're not.
Not
just
self-centered.
going through- Yeah,
Right, because,
with the people around you, with the people in the body of the church, with yourself, you know, and in remembrance of him and doing it in that manner, in a worthy manner, you know, it'd be empty. You know, if you leave a lot of that empty and you're just going through the process.
right, and I probably shared this with you too, but I didn't see this happen to myself, but I remember a preacher friend talking about one Sunday at his congregation when they were serving communion. One of the I don't know if it was an elder, but one of the men in the church who was, you know, a strong man in the church, didn't take communion that Sunday. And so the preacher afterwards said, you know, I couldn't help but notice you didn't take communion. And his response was, I just didn't feel worthy today. And it's like, well, you know, I hope you never do. Hope you never do. It's not a matter of feeling worthy. The worthy manner would be humility. It would be part of the family. It would be in honor of what Jesus did. Therefore, how should I be living my life?
Except
In
when
community.
you're not worthy and you're giving thanks. And
We are not worthy, and we realize. In fact, part of taking this in a worthy manner is realizing how unworthy we are.
right, there you
Right, Steve.
It's sort of what you just said brought to mind of the Pharisee and publican going down to pray.
Yes.
And if you thought you were worthy, now that would be an unworthy manner.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. Look who went to their house justified. The man who beat his chest and said,
You know,
Lord,
Mark,
be merciful to me, a
the
sinner.
other situation is, where did that man get that notion of unworthiness? Because it's probably through the, I'm assuming the Catholic Church.
Oh.
But I mean, and Glenn did it, gave us a tremendous handout yesterday, your dad, on apostasy through the Catholic Church and the progression. I mean, they took it to new levels.
Yeah.
And we talk about getting away from the truth.
Yes,
But
yes.
the truth of the matter is just what you said, and it's got nothing to do with worthiness.
Yes, yes. Okay, well, let's get, again, here I'm doing it again, but let's try to get the big picture of verse 28. Let a person examine himself. So part of this is self-reflection. You got to examine your own life. Then, and so let him, and so eat of the bread and drink of the cup. For if anyone who eats and drinks without discerning the body eats and drinks judgment on himself. Okay, I know there's differences of opinion here, but I tell you, the more I read this, the more I think he is not talking about just thinking about the physical body of Jesus hanging on the tree. I realize that's a possibility. But in the context here, I think he's talking about the body of Christ, the church. He says, if you're what was that verse again, verse 29? If anyone eats or drinks without discerning the body, eats and drinks judgment on himself. In fact, look at the response of this. What kind of judgment do they get? That's why many of you are weak and sick, and some have fallen asleep, the NIV says. My translation says, some have died. Well, why have people gotten sick and ill and died? Why? Because they've undercome judgment? And what's this judgment a result of?
Not worthy.
Not recognizing
Not
God.
recognizing the body of Christ.
For not discerning the body? Yeah, which the older... Yeah, if I'm understanding this correctly, this disharmony thing, this creating divisions amongst Christians, this pulling apart instead of bringing together, this whole thing brings judgment. And sometimes judgment means people get sick. Sometimes it means, what does it say here? Die? Okay, now look at this. I'm glad it didn't stop at verse 30. He says, but if we judged ourselves truly, we would not be judged. In other words, God says, I'm going to give you a chance to do this so I don't have to. You judge yourself so I don't have to. So you take some time to do that. But he says, but when we are judged by the Lord, we are disciplined so that we may not be condemned along with the world. This is so important. When people are judged by God, does that mean that they are no longer saved? No, in fact, he's saying the exact opposite. Sometimes God brings judgment in our lives, which means it can come in a lot of different forms. Remember Hebrews the 12th chapter, like a father disciplines his child, God out of love disciplines us. In fact, if anybody has not been disciplined, what does Hebrews 12 say? If you've not been disciplined, you're not really a child. Right, so there's discipline involved, but discipline means, in fact, back to Hebrews 12 again, if it's not uncomfortable, then it's not really discipline. So no discipline seems good while it's going on, right? But that purpose of that discipline is so that we won't lose our relationship with God. So he says that's why God allows this. Well, the one that gets me, though, is, what did he say here? That's why a number of you are sick and weak and...
And dead, yeah.
Does that mean God lets some people die so that they won't go so far as to lose their relationship with him?
Or the others that are still alive.
Or the other people that they might affect in some way?
Yeah. Hard to say.
I'm raising my eyebrows here, but I think that's what this is saying. He's saying God does this, and this is judgment from God, in order that we may not be condemned along with the world. You know what? I'd rather God take my life than let me get to the point where I go down a path where I've lost my relationship. I'd much rather, or cause somebody else to stumble and lose their relationship with God. I'd much rather be taken out of the picture before something like that. And I think that's exactly what you said here. Did you have a hand up over here?
Okay. So do you think this is kind of like Ananias and Sapphira judgment, like a divine judgment, like that kind of working? Or do you think this is like the brothers are not caring about each other and some people are getting hungry and dying because of it or something like that?
Oh, no, I think it's more, personally, I think it's more divine. I'm glad you didn't use the word miraculous. I do think it's very much God involved, and that's why it says, that's the reason a number of you are weak and sick, and some have died. So I think this is God caused. You know, there are some things that happen to us in this life because we live in a world that's just full of sin. Some things that happen to us because we're doing, some bad things happen to us because we're doing the right thing. Being persecuted. But some bad things happen to us because God's trying to get our attention. Or trying to teach us or somebody else. I think Ananias and Sapphira, in fact, I know it had a huge impact on the church.
Still does.
That might be a classic example of what's going on here, because it does have an impact on other people. Yeah.
I don't know where, I remember where in the Old Testament, you know, he told Israel, or he told Judah, that he brought disasters upon them, and they still didn't repent.
Oh my, yeah.
So there's an example where he brought all kinds of things on them, and they weren't getting the
And
picture.
yet, still you have not returned to me. Yeah, that refrain in Amos, all the way through, yes, yes, I gave you cleanness of teeth, and yet you have not returned. That's exactly right. Sometimes God uses these things to wake us up. But again, we still haven't finished the, sorry. But we're disciplined so that we will not be condemned along with the world. So then, verse 33, what does your translation say? Does anyone say therefore?
So
Could have. I wish there was one that did. But so that, because he's kind of wrapping things up there. He says, so then, brothers, when you come together to eat, wait for one another. In other words, he's talked about all this stuff, and then he's really focused on the Lord's Supper, the communion time. But he comes back to, see, if he just talked about this division stuff and then went on to talk about the Lord's Supper, I wouldn't feel so strong about the fact that I really think he's still talking about division, as I do, because he talks about the Lord's Supper and then he goes right back to this division thing again. And he says, so then, my brothers, when you come together to eat, wait for one another. If someone's hungry, let him eat at home. So that when you come together, it will not be for judgment. And about other things, I will give you directions when I come. That last phrase, by the way, I think what he's saying is there are other things we can talk about, but this one's urgent. This one's big. This is something that I really had to talk about. I'm sorry, my mind's going a mile a minute because I'm thinking to myself, there's so many different ways this is displayed. And sometimes it's just because we're not thinking. But just a classic example, and since I don't have anybody in mind, I think I can actually do this. But have you ever been at a church meal where the first when it's time to eat, some people run to the front like there's nobody else there. And they put enough on their plate to feed a small village in Vietnam. And it's kind of like, do you realize if the next 3 people put that much on their plate, that nobody else in the building's gonna get? You know, you've been at places where things like that, and it just makes me think, why are we here? Are we here to eat? No, eating's just a part. What we're here is to be with other Christians. And he's just one of the things that takes place while we're doing that. But anyway, to me, that's just an obvious example because we're talking about it. But this manifests itself in so many different ways, doesn't it? Such as, you know, I'm going to pick on all the ones that I don't like, right? So you could, but it always gets me when let me just at Walmart. Why is it? I'm so sorry, but why is it some people I can go in and go shopping and come back out and somebody's still waiting on that really good spot?
Yeah.
I'm thinking, why in the world do if you just park back there, you could have.
It's my usual spot.
Yeah, but it's
That's the one that can use the exercise too.
right. But I'm just saying this for. I know this sounds so silly, but these kind of things, as far as people ought to be saving the best parking places for other people. They ought to be making sure that other people get the cup of coffee first, and all that stuff. The consciousness isn't, I got to get my cup of coffee. I got to have a good place to see. No, it should. That shouldn't. Our mindset is, boy, I hope everybody else is doing good. You know what I mean? Especially when we get together with the church, whether it's meal or just how we interrelate or whatever.
You file in for a county fair and the guys are parking the cars, right?
Yeah.
They try to park you all the way down so everybody fits in.
Yeah.
I know there's that one guy that wants to do, right as soon as he gets in the lane, boom. Yeah. I know what
It's
you're
usually the preacher.
But, I mean, what this is, Sam's saying, is that a lot of people are, I say a lot of different churches, losing the picture. It's not a social event, it's about God. If you want to have a social club, go to the Lions Club.
Yes.
This is the church that he purchased with his blood.
Yes.
It's not about us and what we want to do.
Yes.
This is God's time,
Yes.
his sacrifice. And it's just getting too social.
Yeah, and let me go back to one of these phrases. You proclaim the Lord's death till he comes. You know what? You know what you're proclaiming to people a lot of times? We're proclaiming, I'm first, I'm more important, I enjoy this. Instead of proclaiming what it's like to have a relationship with God. If the mindset is always thinking about what can we do for the body, for other people, put other people first, that's the kind of thing that makes a statement. That's the kind of thing that people need to see and need to hear. So this whole communion idea manifests itself in just about every walk. Jay and Jerry.
Mark, a twist of irony is, as you said, but do we really go there to worship? Because the church body in that building is the fellowship. But the way we glorify God is by a behavior within that building. And it is social. But in that social framework, it's the unselfishness. Because like Mark always said, we need to glorify God 24/7.
Right.
So that's the real test, like Mark says, within there is the unity, is the Christian-like behavior.
Yeah, because you can let somebody have a good spot at church and then you go cut them off at Walmart.
That's right.
Kind of lost the whole thing there, right? It's relationships regardless.
So that's the challenge, Mark, and every day in the day-to-day things we do within our own brotherhood more than anywhere, that's what we need to exhibit and like love your neighbor.
I am so glad you said that because we do have a responsibility to be loving towards everyone, but there ought to be just a specialness about the fellowship, a priority that we give to other Christians that people ought to see. Jay.
Yeah, you think about that night where Jesus was going to wash the apostles' feet. And,
Same night.
No, you don't wash mine.
Yes.
They didn't get it.
Yeah.
Jesus came to serve, not to be served.
Yeah.
And you talk about James and John. Well, can I sit on your right and you on your left? Even the apostles had, all the time they spent with them, they still didn't get everything to it. I mean, and that's why this is a process, and it is one where we have to be loving and forgiving and, realize where people are, in what state they are in their sanctification process. And
Yeah, yeah, and you know, Jay, you make me think of blind spots too, because I'm very conscious about, you know, because I was brought up in congregations where we had a lot of meals and stuff, so I'm really conscious about how, you know, who runs the first of the line, stuff like that. But it wasn't until I got married that I realized I was really rude to the people who take tolls at the toll road, because I hate tolls. And I was taking it out on those poor people in the booth, this guy, "Arr!" and Lori's, you know, it's just a job to them, and I'm like, you know, you're right. Here I was getting back at the government by that, you know what I mean? It's just because and to me it's kind of making the point of, I gotta think, life's too important not to think about your witness, the statement you make by the way you interact with other
Yeah,
people.
'cause we're on display
Yeah.
24/7.
Oh my, and you know, when you're talking about the apostles, my favorite one is, they're talking about it again, who's going to be first, and Jesus turns to him and says, what are you guys talking about? And nobody wants to admit. You know, no, we're not talking about anything.
This is one and the same with overturning the tables of the money changers.
Mm.
Changing the money and selling them the sacrifices, it wasn't wrong. It was the fact that they were doing it in a temple. That wasn't where you do that. That's not in the temple. The temple was for God. And, I mean, there was
We
provision
call it
in
house
the
of
old
prayer.
law.
Zeal
So if
for
you
his
travel a
father's
long
house.
distance,
Yeah.
you know, you can buy your animal as a location when you get to Jerusalem.
Right.
That was, what they were doing was wrong, it was where they were doing it, you know. And I see that as one and the same with what Paul's saying here, 1 Corinthians 11.
Within the fellowship, within the body of Christ.
Yeah, it was that this is a house of God, but you've made it a den of thieves.
Yeah.
You know, and when you come together to worship, it should be for purpose, not your own, but God's.
Right. However, I do agree with what Jerry's saying too, though. Every time worship's mentioned in the Bible, it's in the New Testament. Have to be careful here. In the New Testament, it's not talking about an assembly time. Like Romans chapter 12, first two verses, present your bodies as living sacrifices. Something we do all the time. So it's a consciousness we have. We're not living this life for myself. It's as though I'm saying, God, I hope you're pleased. Worship should signify everything we do. But there are special times when the body comes together and does assemble. I'm not
That's what I say,
disagreeing
when
with
you
that
come
at all.
together, it's not for you to have a meal.
No,
That's,
you're
that's
right.
what he was saying.
Right.
You come together for a specific purpose, and that's to worship God. So I think, this is the context of what he's saying, is the worship service.
But I just wouldn't use the word worship, but I do think, simply because worship is a 24/7 thing, but I do think there are, in fact, I'm glad you bring this up.
I mean,
Because when he says here, as often as you meet, how often did the church meet together to have the Lord's Supper?
once a week,
Which day?
first day,
First day, how do we know that?
Acts 27.
Yes. Acts chapter 20, verse 7. They met together on the first day of the week to have
For the purpose of.
for the communion. Yeah,
Right.
that's exactly right. That's exactly right. So there's no passage in the Bible where it commands that. This is an example we're following. And that example is found in Acts chapter 20, verse 7. Right. All right, well, we did make it to the end of the chapter, right? Okay, so I guess this is a good first period. And we'll pick up with chapter 12 next week. Any other questions, comments?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, let's pray.